Made possible through support from PASCO, Personal Assistance Services of Colorado, the Arc of Aurora, CCDC, Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, and Developmental Pathways. A THINK+change training.
Hi, I'm Hani Rayleigh with the Arc of Aurora, here today offering a THINK+change training on all things IEP. What I want to do is provide you an overview of what to expect in the IEP process. Jeff and Petrie will provide some additional episodes that'll tell you a little bit more and get more into depth with IEP specifics. But what you should know about an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, is that it is a federally mandated document that provides free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities in the least restrictive setting. So you will have, you'll hear about the breakdown of some of those words. FAPE is the free and appropriate public education, and LRE is the least restrictive environment. So if you hear these acronyms being thrown around, they really drive directly back to IDEA, which is the federal mandate that allows and it requires public school settings to provide access to education for kiddos with disabilities. In Colorado, the Office of Special Education at the Colorado Department of Education is the governing office. They're the ones that administer the Exceptional Children's Education Act, and also IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act for kiddos with disabilities. There's some specific components with IEPs that you should know about. First of all, if you are a very young child or have a very young child, birth to 3, birth to 5 years old, where you suspect that they might have a disability or perhaps a delay and could use some early childhood education and supports, there's a function of IDEA called Child Find. You'll be able to find that in any of your districts, school districts, that will provide some evaluation and diagnostics to figure out what kind of supports your kiddo could use to achieve at a level similar to their peers. So look into Child Find to get some early intervention supports so that even before you're in a public school setting or before you expect to be in a public school setting, you have a better idea of how your kiddo learns and perhaps have some access to some of those supports before they even get into a public school setting. So let's go now to if you're already in a public school setting and you are experiencing for the first time or many times later the IEP process. What this is that your team will gather regularly, definitely annually, and to look at the IEP, update it, and to build in some additional goals, objectives, or talk about accommodations that your child might need. First of all, you have to be eligible for an IEP. There are 13 disability types that your child could find themselves eligible for an IEP under. These are for kiddos that are, 3 years old to 21 years old. You do have access to a public education through 21 years old if you need that kind of support. So keep that in mind that there are some transition supports too after that typical senior year, 18 years old. You have to be identified as having a disability that impedes your learning like your typical peers might. It closes the gap on, kind of that educational support that you need. The eligibility is determined through standardized assessments. Just because you have a medical diagnosis doesn't always mean that an IEP is necessary or appropriate. The school will want to do some evaluations and assessments as well to identify whether your disability impedes your learning or impacts your learning style. Once you have an identified disability type, either educational or through that medical diagnosis that provided some kind of breadth of knowledge for that IEP team to determine whether or not you fit in one of those 13 disability types, You'll move forward with really the meat of the IEP. You'll build some goals and objectives. Again, those goals and objectives are in place to help you start to close the gap on achievement and build in some of those educational skills that you'll need to continue to progress. You'll also talk during that IEP process about accommodations. Accommodations can be physical accommodations like preferred seating in a school setting, or visual aids, or tasks that are broken down in multiple steps. They could even be extended time for homework. Those accommodations should follow you throughout all school environments. They'll also be talked about the accommodations in regards to state standardized testing as well. An individual might be eligible for an accommodated standardized test. That's a pretty important piece for that team to talk about. So make sure that those accommodations aren't just a passing part of your IEP, that really you're talking about accommodations as they relate to all of the school environments and all of the goals and objectives. In that IEP, you'll also talk about service hours. Those service hours are intended to really designate the amount of time that your kiddo will spend in certain areas of the school. So whether they are in a general ed setting, whether they're in a specialized learning center or a special education room, what kind of time they're spending with an occupational therapist or a speech therapist or even a counselor. So when you're talking about service hours, that really helps to set the schedule, at least weekly, for your kiddo to better understand what kind of supports or access to itinerant staff that they'll have. You'll also want to include any kind of healthcare information. If there's specialized healthcare needs, that would be included in that IEP as well. You'll also want to include a behavior plan. The behavior plan is typically driven by a functional behavior assessment or analysis. This helps to look at, from a standardized way, what is the function of the behavior? What is the child getting from the behavior, whether it's to escape a certain scenario or to access a certain scenario? There is always a function of that behavior. And the FBA helps to identify what that is and then to start addressing some of those mechanisms to help your kiddo find that behavior is less challenging in a school environment. You'll always want to be collecting data to make assessments and to make improvements with both the FBA and your goals and objectives, your educational goals and objectives. In the IEP, you're going to talk a little bit about the extent that your kiddo will participate with their general ed peers. You'll want to get a good idea of is your child only spending perhaps lunch with general ed peers, or are there other opportunities to more include your child in the school environment with their peers. You'll also be talking a little bit about extended school year. That's really for when children are on breaks, so whether it's spring break or summer break or your winter break. Extended school year provides some goals and objectives work in a school-like setting, but it looks really different than the school year. Oftentimes, some of those same itinerant staff, like speech language pathologists or occupational therapists, aren't as readily available. You're oftentimes not in the home school that your kiddo is used to attending, and the service hours just look really different. Sometimes it's broken up throughout the summer. So get a better idea of what extended school year really looks like for your child, so that you know what to expect and you can start to kind of build some social stories around that for your kiddo, so that it's not super scary and totally new for them. When you get to be 14 years old, the IEP team starts to shift a little bit and talk both still about academic goals, but also starting to talk about transition goals. So talking about what adult world looks like for your child. Oftentimes, we're not really ready to talk about what our kid is going to be like when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. When they're 14 years old, they barely turn teens. But you want to start thinking about that early so that you are feeling, as a parent, pretty prepared by the time your child gets to be an adult. You'll start talking about what are some preferred interests for career paths. You'll talk a little bit about where will your child live? Will they continue to live in your home? Or will they perhaps be looking at other opportunities? So be prepared for that at 14. It's not intended to replace all academic goals and focus, but it is intended to start the team and your family thinking about what the future looks like. Your IEP will be, like I said, updated annually, but every 3 years at the least, you want to really look at the kind of timeline of education for your child. You'll want a better idea of what kind of progress has been made. You might ask for or be requested by your school team for your child to take some additional tests to get a better idea where they're at communication-wise, to look at some adaptive abilities, those sort of things. So be prepared that at least every 3 years, you'll have probably a different kind of discussion, that you'll talk more about what some standardized tests and assessments are telling you about the child's needs. Of course, you'll go right back through all of the same pieces like goals and objectives and accommodations. But hopefully at the triennial is what it's called, or reevaluation, it gives you a little bit more information as far as problem solving and programming for your child. Always tie back if you are experiencing issues regarding discipline in the school setting, or just issues with perhaps your kiddo's it doesn't feel like your kid's getting what they need when they need it in that school setting. Always look back at that IEP, the IEP team, and that document. Is there more that you can do in that document? Is there more that you can build in for service hours or supports? That IEP is supposed to be living and breathing. It's not supposed to be something you do once a year and put on a shelf. It's supposed to be something that really is referred to and used regularly. Contact the Arc of Aurora or your local advocacy organization if you're ever having trouble with your IEP or the school setting. We're here to help. We want to make sure that your kid gets what they need and is able to make the progress that they have the right to. So thanks so much for tuning in. Definitely stay in touch and watch Jeff and Petrie's episodes on the IEP and the specifics that you'll want to know about. But thanks for being with me today.